G'day, legends. I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic midweek. You're almost there. Now, today, as always, we have a lot to talk about. So we're going to look at the maps. We'll talk about the north. We'll look at some geolocated footage and what might line up in here and what we are seeing and the deployment of troops. And we'll line that up with predictions we had in the start when we first saw this north open up here as well. So we'll look over that. Now, it's been a year anniversary since the launch of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. We'll look back at some pieces of this. We'll talk about the electricity grid in Ukraine and the rolling blackouts that it has had to now undertake due to Russian strikes. And of course, we'll talk about NATO and new plans being discussed about a potential deployment if Russia was to seek war beyond Ukraine, as that is the messaging from pretty much every Western official, that if Russia is not stopped here, they will continue through. Now, we've spoken about the critical thinking aspect of this and the struggle we're seeing in Ukraine versus how that would look, but we'll discuss it anyway. And is there build up then for something? But there's a few things I want to talk about in the beginning, and I was a bit like, oh, yeah, no shit. Now, I always knew people talking about the Russians are fighting with shovels. Now, we knew that really not to be true, but that was, and it's still, you'll see it said either sarcastically or seriously. But I never really knew the origin of this until I was doing an interview yesterday with a Polish fighter in Ukraine who had spent 14 months on the front line. He explained how that came about. Now, they used the term diggers. I will use the term diggers when I talk about the Australian military, dating back into the World Wars. Australian referred to as diggers, but they referred to these Russian troops as diggers. And he explained, no. These were not guys on the front line with shovels. These were guys behind the very front line. So as Russia made ground, and he was explaining and all this will be on an interview coming soon, that as Russia made any ground, their first focus, once they move forward, would be to dig in and reinforce and make a defensive position there. And behind the troops in the first and second line, there were hundreds to thousands of guys who were unarmed soldiers just there with shovels to dig down that position as soon as possible. So these aren't guys within the fight, although they may have been struck by drones or munitions behind the line, but behind the line, as soon as possible, bang, let's dig in the position once it's then moved forward. And that seems far more plausible. I never knew sort of the background origin of how that all came about. Anyway, he also gave me some insight into sort of what's going on the front line, what we can see. Now, of course, this is going to be over 2 hours, but I thought I'd just share some pieces with you. And he said that there's plenty of weapons, but there's no men to use them. And he spoke about how then this came about. He said that Ukraine's own information proper campaign, talking about everything is fine, we are winning, has led many men to being like, well, if everything is fine and we have small losses and we're winning, why would I now sign up? So it's been, well, everything's fine on the front line. I don't need to go down to the recruitment office and then sign up. And he actually said that this was also reinforced and fueled as well by Russian intelligence agencies, pushing that messaging and that narrative as well for a reverse psychology psyop as well to stop that recruitment. Ended up in the area we are now, where we don't have people signing up, and Ukraine is going to have to rely then on forced conscription. And he also talked about within this mixed messaging of that Russians are unadaptable orcs fighting with shovels, so to speak, that this was also fueled by Russian intelligence agencies. And then this led to a complacency throughout then Ukrainian personnel, military rank and officials that Russians can't adapt. They're unadaptable. They're orcs fighting with shovels. And this in turn led to complacency and has landed in the situation we are now, where we have a Ukrainian manpower shortage. The Russians have adapted weapon systems and tactics, and the situation of now of which when the Russians hold the initiative and Ukraine is trying to stop that then advancement. Anyway, let's have a look at the maps, some geolocated bits and pieces as well. So here is Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, there are some interesting changes on this map, but first I want to go up into the north. Now, we don't see any change on this Vovchansk front on this map. I'll show you some maps where it does show changes. Now, Vovchansk in here on this eastern push here. I've been saying since day one, and I'll still say it, that we have not seen, in my eyes, full Russian commitment to this front due to the lack of armour that we've seen here from not only Russian pages, but from Ukrainian pages. Because as we know, with armour, it's very susceptible to FPV drones. Ukraine have a lot of success with FPV drones, and the amount of armour and other armoured units in here, we just haven't seen much of that at all, destruction of this. So I still think that this is a deterrence force to draw Ukrainian forces in. And as I've said since day one, I think we could see a withdrawal and abandonment of these areas as quickly as we then saw that initial push. Now, that is not saying that Russia hasn't suffered large casualties in here, but what it is saying is that what has Ukraine committed to here to try and stop this push as well. And this lines up to what we've spoken about with optics at the front line and trading ground for time for PR victories as well. And I want to read this out. I know we've read this like 50 times. There's no easy strategic prize at the end of this line of advance for Russia. I think the problem for Ukraine is they put so much stock in optics that they're so narrative driven that it absolutely skews their military decisions towards absurdity. Because of this box they've created for themselves, they feel like they have to block all progress all the time. But they have neither the manpower nor equipment for such tactics. They should be trading territory for time, especially territory like this. Burning men and machines means you have less time. And let's look at the Ukrainian deployment map off a Ukrainian page here at the units currently that are committed to here. Now we have then a lot of units as well as the 101st Brigade, one of Ukraine's more elite brigades, putting in here, feeding a lot of resources onto here away from other front lines. And could this be playing into what Russia are trying to do here? Yes, put some men in here, it will sacrifice men, but it moves units away, and that means you'll have success in other areas. And it does seem in the south where Russia is then having success. And we've spoken about, like this optics, that if you're committed to blocking all progress all the time, well, it's not going to work like that when you are fighting with the smaller force. Anyway, let's have a look at some changes in here. So this is then the Noel Reports map here, of course, a pro-Ukrainian source showing more control up to here. We saw that's where that surrender then took place yesterday. But interestingly, the MOD map itself has not updated with a Ukrainian advancement in here. So it is difficult to know exactly what the case actually is here. Now, let's then have a look at another bridge that was taken out. So where are we then talking? So this is Kharkiv, this is Vovchansk up here, and the bridge is just to the south then of Kupiansk. So we'll swing back onto this map. You'll get then a better idea. So we then have Kharkiv, Kupiansk come down, and it is this bridge here that has then been taken out by a Russian missile. There we go. And as we do know, there has been a lot of bridges taken out in this direction. And we know, just looking here, Russia did last week have these advancements near Berestov and Stelmakivka as well confirmed across the map. So we're not sure on this front whether there could be something. I think what Russia's doing is feeling out in many different areas to see where may be a likely position and then push in there if we see then a major advancement go forward. The trap that Russia could get caught in is saying that, well, we need to have an offensive by this date. And if they haven't found a good area to do it, launching it anyway, which may go in line with something we saw 12 months ago today, and then getting caught, trapped, and the losses you have then coming away from having good defensive positions and or another offensive down then the line. Now, let's have a look at what then the MOD is saying about advancements on the front line. The Avdiivka-Pokrovsk sector has remained the probable main effort for Russian forces over the last 72 hours. With a high level of operational activity, Russian forces made minor gains in the northern part of this sector towards the villages of Sokol and Yevivka on a parallel axis. Approximately 3 kilometers further south, Russian forces are likely approaching the outskirts of the village of Novoselivka, Persha. We'll speak about these. Further south, Russian forces have made no significant gains despite heavy attacks against Ukrainian positions west of the village of Netilyove, astride the E50 highway. Russian attacks against the village of Novelsky have reportedly been repelled, and the village likely remains in Ukrainian hands. Over the next week, this sector is likely to remain an area of significant operational focus as Russian forces attempt to maintain operational tempo in the face of heavy losses. So it's always, always, always about heavy losses this, heavy losses that. But we've heard this for so long and it's not seeming to have too much then effect, which is a concern for how quickly things can spin up and spin down in war. So we'll just come just above Bakhmut. Now, no change then shown on this map, but in Rozhdalivka, we then have a Syriac map update just here. Now, the area we're looking is, see where this road turns out to the northeast, same road, as well as then the train line running up here. Russian army made small advances towards Rozhdalivka by taking control over some trenches in this direction. So just on this front here, but nothing confirmed across both maps. Now, we'll just move to the south, nothing in Chasiv Yar, and then we come down to the Avdiivka front. You'll see a little bit of red here out from the northwest of Osheretny in this direction. Now we have a Syriac map update confirming this advancement here. We don't need to speak at length, I guess, about this because it shows basically the same area. If anything, the deep state map actually shows more advancement into these towns. See where this road then turns up and then turns to the west. This is said road that Ukraine's own map is showing more than Syriac in this direction. Now, we'll just move down past Ulmansk, no change. This is some of the areas of which the MOD, UK MOD was talking about. Nevelsky, this isn't said to be under control. We don't have any other maps showing that under control. Krasnohivka, we know there's a lot of fighting in here, but no major changes. And then we have this front, I'll just put this as the whole of Ugledar, Novomyalivka sort of pocket down in here. We do see a Russian advancement towards Paraskovskia in here, and we do have a little bit to look over as well, and a geolocation sitting in Paraskovskia. So we have a look just here, Novomyalivka, Paraskovskia, just in this area here. So we'll zoom down just right in here. We can see this is said to be then under control. We have a Russian flag has been raised on a destroyed building just here. So run up, chuck the flag up, back to cover, and whatever your missions are from there, because the amount of shelling, mines, fighting in these areas is massive. But let's look at the advancement here, and let's look over some changes then shown on the map. Now, this isn't the easiest thing to line up, but we will do it regardless. So, see where this road then is running? This is this road through Konstantinivka. Here, this is Paraskovskia, this is Novomyalivka, this is Solodki as well. So, showing at this corner an advancement out here by Syriac, as well as showing direction just due south of Paraskovskia as well, but also confirming this red dot is Pobeda, confirming this advancement here as well. So we do know 100% one of these was made. During the last 36 hours, Russian army launched a series of attacks along the front between Ugledar and Donetsk city and managed to advance west of Solodki, southeast of Konstantinivka, north of Paraskovskia, and south of Pobeda. Lining up with what the MOD said about this will likely remain the Russian main effort. Now, here we go. Robotny, we have a change shown in here of a Russian advancement of, how far is this? About 1 kilometer. Now we know, depending on the maps, this looks significantly different. Some are looking more like this. Again, we are seeing some changes made in here, but I believe this is one of the more sensitive areas due to then the offensive and everything that happened in there. So that will end and conclude our mapping for today. Now, like I said, we did then have the offensive launch, which is basically the anniversary of it now. And we did see that Ukraine said that our plans were then leaked. Russia knew what we were going to do. And of course, we have then the infamous trailers of this one and the Shush campaign that was released before that then as well. But I want to speak about, is something big happening? And I'm guessing the clickbaity title is something to do with this. Now, the comedian, but someone who's very, very intelligent, well-read, Tim Dillon, he has said, talking about the Iraq war, at the height of terrorism, no one even talked about draft. And of course, we see only, say yesterday, Australia announced new laws letting citizens of other nations join our military because we have a massive retention issue. We just can't keep soldiers and we can't get people to join and become soldiers, which if you hired me, I could literally fix this in a month. It would be easy to fix. It's just all these generals who are getting paid hundreds of thousands, $1 million don't see the issues at the bottom. And I'll happily just take my pay cut out of the General Angus Campbell, so Chief of the Defence Forces, on in 2019-20, so 3 or 4 years ago, on over $1 million. We know there's a few 11% pay rises since then. So I'll just take a small sliver of that money from one of the highest paid military members actually in the world. It's higher paid than the US and the UK and Canada, or larger militaries than ours as well. I'll just take off the first 1 and 0. I'll just take 63,000 and I'll fix the retention issue in a day. But we also see the UK Tories, if they win the election, which is upcoming, that they will start national service. We see France wanting to deploy. We'll talk about that in a second. And I believe the most telling is military advertisements in Western countries have now average-looking white guys in them again, which I believe that is the biggest telling sign. But we see then this released today too, that NATO developing multiple corridors to rush US troops and armour to the front lines in the event of a major European ground war against Russia. Now, this is nothing new. We know that there's always plans and things in the works of this. It has been since there was the Soviet Union and NATO and pre-this. This is what military bloody tacticians are there to do. What happens if this then happens? But it comes amid warnings from the alliance's top leaders that Western governments must prepare themselves for a conflict with Russia in the next 2 decades. But I thought from all the reporting earlier that Russia was strategically defeated for up to 50 years. Interesting. But agreed to prepare 300,000 troops to be kept in a state of high readiness to defend an alliance in the summit in Vilnius, Lithuania last year. High readiness, low readiness, it just flows through different battalions. You have a battalion on high readiness all the time. It's nothing they're new, but they've put this out as well. The event of Russian invasion of NATO, US troops will be shipped to the port of Rotterdam before being transported eastwards. But arrangements are also being made behind the scenes to expand the routes and other ports to ensure grand lines of communication, so G-locks, you see, cannot be severed by Moscow forces. So this Lieutenant General of NATO's JSEC Logistics Command told the Telegraph, Ukraine suffers very much from the Russian long-range missile attacks on the logistics system. So if those G-locks are then cut, where there's ways in and around it on multiple front lines, all heading into then a war, if it was a ground war against Russia, which I believe is the last thing we want in Europe, is a war against major powers. If NATO entering the Netherlands are hit by US bombardment or northern European ports destroy, the alliance is set to shift focus to ports in Italy, Greece, and Turkey, which you can see in this as well. Now, with many countries now saying that China is fully supporting Russia, well, that I think even means more so that we then don't want then a war like this. Plans being drawn up to transport troops via the Balkans, as we see through Norway, Sweden, and Finland. So this is interesting, but again, I don't think that this is anything new. There's a little bit of saber rattling. Of course, there's a lot of saber rattling from Putin and Russia and the Kremlin. There's saber rattling the other way as well. And things like this need to be set up, because if it wasn't set up and something did happen, well, that's not going to go very well either. But I do believe that we will see major conflict. And if you're watching this from somewhere and we go into conflict with you, yeah, it's going to fucking suck, because we a major power war, whether it is in the Middle East, whether it's in Europe, wherever, would be an absolute bloodbath with modern weapon systems and the amount of troops that could be deployed. We have not seen a war on that scale since the Second World War. And this war in Ukraine, this is not comparable to how that would look with weapon systems from other major players, as well as the amount of troops that would be mobilized too. But we spoke before about then France wanting to deploy troops. We've seen Macron talk about this multiple times. And then Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, said this at the Republic of Congo's foreign minister, that as for French instructors, I think they're already on the Ukrainian territory, which we can assume from the German leaked phone call. Regardless of their status, military officials and mercenaries represent a legitimate target for our armed forces. In Moscow, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said instructors who train Kiev regime's troops don't have any sort of immunity, and it doesn't matter whether they are French or not. That said, it's all one thing saying this. Would there really be a strike against something like this? I don't know, because Russia wanted to sort of inch forward without too much escalation and support in, while then maintaining their own escalation too. So it is this weird game of minor ladder escalation that the West is playing with Russia. Now, we know there's been a lot of Russian strikes against Ukraine critical infrastructure, and it is having a huge effect on the electricity grid. The Guardian report today, state power operator Ukrenergo on Tuesday introduced forced electricity blackouts in several regions, including capital of Kiev, frontline Donetsk, and Kharkiv. That these Russian missile drone barrages, including major attack of the weekend, have damaged Ukraine's energy networks and stretched its air defences. One thing is this could get significantly worse at the end of the year, leading into winter. And we have seen as well that Ukraine nearly doubles consumer electricity tariffs to help the power sector. So, of course, this is a bit of a butterfly effect of the effect on this, and it could mean then a lot of people move out of Ukraine into then the EU as well, and then that has more of a problem on businesses, recruitment, all of this inside Ukraine too. Anyway, legends, that is all that I have for you today. I'm actually a bit under the weather, so if I've been like, my nose is so blocked, but look after yourselves, have a great day, and I'll speak to you very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.